Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I'm really excited about tonight's programming. My name is Rob Berger, and about a year ago, I started collecting recorded oral histories of people within our community, the gay community. It was that project that led me to put together tonight's event. If I had to describe tonight's event in 2 words, I think I would describe it as legends and trailblazers. Legends because all the 4 people who are sitting here are legendary in their status in our community, and trailblazers because we owe them all a debt of gratitude for what they've done in their actions to improve all of our lives. The stories you'll hear tonight are stories of both victories and defeats. You'll hear about police raiding bars and private parties and arresting people. You'll hear about people maybe even being arrested for kissing. You'll hear about how being gay was an issue of secrecy and considered a private matter. You'll hear about deeply woven, intimate social networks. And you'll hear about secret meeting places and signals that people use to communicate between each other their gay status. The people on the panel tonight, all the way at the end, Fred Holdridge, who moved to Columbus with his partner in 1959. Next to him, Steve Shellabarger, who moved to Columbus to go to Ohio State in 1963. Next to him, Orn Huntington, who was born in Columbus in 1919 and lived here for the majority of his life, other than a career in Hollywood for 10 years and a couple of other stops. And then finally, closest to me, Mary Jo Hudson, Columbus City Councilwoman, who's a legend in recent times and who moved to Columbus in 1989. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know there is a program for tonight's event. It's sitting there on the front table. Feel free to pick up a copy. There's a bio of everyone who's participating in tonight's panel in the program. The program also features information about next week's panel, which is next Thursday, which is going to look at Columbus gay scene from 1981 forward. With that, I'll turn it over to MJ and we'll start.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Well, Rob, thank you very much. And I think we all have to thank Rob Berger for putting this together. I think many of you probably have been involved in some type of community project or program where you worked, and then a few years later, another group of folks come along and they do the same thing and make the same mistakes because there's very little history. And there's little history because folks work so hard, and everything we do in the gay community, everything that involves LGBT issues for all of us is intensely personal. And so it really takes its toll on everyone. And I think it is amazing. I've learned so much from some of the folks here. Unfortunately, I just met Orn here, but I think, everybody here has been a mentor to so many. And that is so helpful, and that's one little bit of history that we have, but it's something we have to, I think, Rob, I have to applaud your efforts because, embracing that's how we learn and we grow, and hopefully we don't make some of those mistakes 50 more times, and instead we move forward. I think, do you have, in your programs, do you have bios of folks? Yeah. Okay, so I will dispense with the bios then, unless folks want to, and I'd like to do is just ask the panelists to just share a little bit of your background, what you'd like to share with folks about yourself. And Orn, can we start with you?
Okay, let's see. Well, I was born here in Columbus in May of 1919. I'm 87 years old, and I've been out for 66 years. And Columbus is wonderful. Columbus is a very friendly gay city, and I'm now living in Tucson, Arizona, which is also a very open gay city. And my partner and I are even registered as partners in the city registry, which they have there. And so I'll be happy to talk to you about my life here in Columbus, from the time that I came out, and tell you all the things that really, I think, mostly I'll discuss discrimination, because back in our days, discrimination was the greatest thing, and the thing that you had to deal with was being in a closet in order to survive. So that's what mostly I'll talk about. Now, you.
Now me?
Now you.
Sitting between these two is pretty amazing, you know. And I would also add that there are a lot of people here, and of course we all have our own stories and we all have our own history, and they're all important. And so when they do these projects, it's important for everybody to participate when they can. And please, I'm sure there are going to be some stories from those of you sitting out here, and I hope that they can be free to add in and chime in and tell us some of those things. My history in Columbus is a little bit later than these folks. I did come to Ohio State in 1963, but in many ways, the first few years probably weren't a whole lot different than they had been 30 years before, because in 1963 and 64, it was still a time of being in the closet. And it was a time when this sort of thing just didn't happen. And so what's happened in the last 20 years is incredible. And so much of what was going on in 63 up into the 70s was not a whole lot different. So we'll be happy to talk about that as we go along, and I don't know exactly what direction we're going to do.
Well, I was assuming there'd be a lot more youngsters here that had not experienced what we've experienced. I think a lot of these people may have experienced some of what we've experienced. I came from a religious family. The closet was the word for me, because every time anything happened, it was bad news. I mean, it was bad news. And until even the last 15 or 20 years, when I finally quote came out, I knew by that time everybody knew I was gay, but I'd never said it. But finally the dispatch came out and said, what you do is article, would you come out and dispatch, and we decided what everybody knows now anyway. But up until then, I had the fear of God in me on the whole thing. Religion, high school, took us to the asylum and said, this is what happens to you if you masturbate too much. Army, couldn't do it in the Army, came home. My newspaper was covered with a homosexual ring discovered in the city with the leading announcer, the poor kid that had a high school lead in the play. Everybody was just, my dad said, they'll hang them by their balls. And I'm thinking, if I'm gay, I'm in trouble. In college, one night, 10 people disappeared from the campus because they found out that they were gay. And it's just, every place I went, this was what I met. So I never would have let anybody know I was gay.
That was still happening in the 60s too, because the fraternity, one of my pledge brothers was a professional ice skater. And just all of a sudden, he just disappeared. He was gone. And I ran into him at a gay bar in Toledo maybe 10 years later, and we were talking, and he said that he had been basically taken into a room at the fraternity house and had been told that it was in his best interest not just to leave the fraternity, but to leave Ohio State, and he did.
Orn, did you experience similar?
Well, let me tell you what Columbus was like in 1940. They had, you wouldn't believe it, but we had a gay bar here in 1940. And it was next to the Egan Ryan Funeral Home out on East Broad Street, and it was a guest house in the back, and it was called the Mayfair Club. And what we did, it was wonderful, because the first time I was probably 20, 21. I think I was probably 21 by then. But it was the upstairs place, and they had a trap door you went and you rang the bell on the front of the house, and the guy that owned it, Sterling Wiley, would go over and pull up the trap door and look and see down who was at the front door. And if they liked it, they'd push the button and let them in. And I thought, my God, they had
Everybody turn off their cell phone.
And so the most wonderful thing was, I thought, they had music, guys could dance together. Oh, it was absolutely, I thought I would died and gone to heaven.
Now, were there any women there?
No.
What was it like with men and women? Did you see lesbians?
There weren't any.
Yeah.
It was years before I got to know any lesbians. Lesbians were really closeted.
Yeah.
You didn't see any. And the gay boys, there was plenty of them. But the girls, you didn't know. But the strange thing was, this same Sterling Wiley took me to a house out in the east end there somewhere. And this woman's husband had died, and she had 5 little kids. And she had a lesbian girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And she had those 5 little kids, and all the gay boys used to come and jail in it, and there were those 5 kids, and they were raised in this family. And I saw them years later, and not one of those 5 kids turned out to be gay. So you won't believe it, it is not your environment. Because if it had been your environment, those kids couldn't help but be gay. But that was one of the first lesbians ever, and her girlfriend, the war broke out about that time, and she got a job out at the roundhouse working on steam engines, railroad cars.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. And that's when the girls got the war, when the war came out, the Second World War came out, it's when the girls got to come out and do the jobs and do the things that they wanted to do, and they weren't what's the word before it's criticized.
Oh, okay.
Criticized for doing men's work.
Yes.
She was probably the one when they wrote that song about run to the roundhouse Nelly.
Well, that was a great sound. She said, run, Nellie, run to the roundhouse because they can't corner you there.
Interesting.
But anyway, no, that was one of my first experiences with lesbians. I didn't meet many girls, and really, even when we started. Later, when we started the Berwick Party House thing, which we started in 1964, there were no lesbians involved, and we did. The only lesbian we had in 1965, I think, was Carol Jean Curtis, and Carol Jean Curtis, she was a dancer, and she would choreograph the numbers the boys would do, and. But when it came to the party, which you can't come because it's all boys, you can't, it's all gay boys, you can't come, we won't allow. We said, well, we'll let you come if you work. So he said, well, but you have to, so she did the spotlight. And she worked the spotlight for 10 years. And Carol Jean, and she was the first girl that we ever had at Berwick parties. But let's see, where do you want to go from there?
Tell us a little bit more about the Berwick Halloween Ball, since while we're on the spotlight,
Well,
we're spotlighting it. So.
The Berwick party was started in 1964 because this was after I'd been in Hollywood and I came back to Columbus and so forth. And everyone...
We're going to come back to that Hollywood.
Everyone seems to think that if you go to Hollywood, you're an entertainer. Well, I was not an entertainer, I was an actor. But everyone said, oh, you must give a party. What? You're a party, you give a party. So I organized some people, and we decided to have a Halloween party. But everything was so closeted. This was 1964. So where do you give a gay Halloween ball? So I scoured around town to find a place to hire so we could have a place to give a party. I finally found a vacant American Legion Hall up on North High Street that we could operate and that we could rent, and there would be nobody there to supervise us or anything. And so we started telling about so we started selling tickets for Halloween. This was in July. So we started selling tickets, and we sold tickets, and we wouldn't tell anybody where the party was going to be. But we every time we sold a ticket, we'd give them a telephone number. Well, when I rented this place, there was a payphone out in front of this place. So I got the telephone number on this payphone, and we'd give them this payphone number. Well, it comes October, and the night of this party, we put someone, we'd say we'll call you call this number and we'll tell you where the party is. So you would be rated. So we'd have these little queens sitting out in this phone booth, and it was 20 degrees out there. It was hysterical. And the kids, we had, I think we had 94 people come to the first Halloween ball. That was in 1964. And the next summer, when we were trying to organize a party for the next year, it was still having difficulty finding a place to have a party, a gay party, because you just can't, they'd be raided. So I happened to know Tony Susie, who was a chef at the Neal House, and he and his wife had just opened the Berwick Party House. They'd bought it and they'd been raising it. And I was telling him about our problem. He says, well, why don't you bring it to the Berwick? And I said, you wouldn't mind having a gay function at your restaurant? And he says, no. He says, we're closed on Sunday. You can always have it on Sunday. So that's why the Berwick party was always on Sunday before Halloween. And we were invited there. And it was just wonderful. We were there for over 10 years. And the Susie family, a lot of kids, well, they didn't want to go there because there were the people that worked there. So none of the people that worked there regularly did. Only the Susie family worked the night of the party. And it turned out well, and we were there for 10 years, and it was so wonderful to be invited to a place and be accepted. And they were always so wonderful. And the reason I wanted to do a party, we've been all going to these gay bars that are smoky, dirty, and I wanted something that would have class to it. So the thing is, they had tables, we had tablecloths on them. There's that everyone, all the guys who came, either had to be in a tuxedo or in costume. And it turned out to be an elegant affair. And that year, the place only held 300 people. We sold out that year, and we sold out every year after that. Because it was the one time in the year where we felt like we were somebody. And that was Berwick. And it went on for 30 years. So this town is amazed. People are amazed all over when you tell them about that story. Because to have a gay function in a town where you actually have wonderful times, and the kids started doing skits. With groups we get together, and we had skits, and then we competed on skits, and there was never a prize money prize or anything. You got a ribbon for being first, second, or third, and it was
and a cheap bottle of champagne.
And a cheap bottle of champagne. But it was a wonderful 30 years, and
Sounds
Columbus
like
can
it.
be very proud of that.
Sounds like it. And did you ever have any trouble with the police?
We never had any trouble with the police at
How
all.
did you manage? How did that happen or not happen, I guess? Do you have any idea?
Well,
That you can tell us at least?
no, we never had there was never any problem with the police. I don't know, the establishment was very well respected, and there was never any problems with that.
Orn, why don't you tell about the party in 1956, where there was a problem?
Well, I will tell that. We'll have to go back for that. When I first came back from Hollywood, I happened to rent a house up in Delaware County called Rathbone Ranch. I knew people who owned it and it was available. And I thought, well, I'll have a business, make a living. I'll give parties for the fraternities at the university. And because they couldn't have liquor in the fraternity parties, but we could have beer and things out there. And it was good. So that's what I did. We had fraternity parties at this. It was a party house, Rathbone Ranch. So I thought, after a while, well, there were so many gay friends. We'd do a gay party once a month. So once a month, on a Saturday night, we'd have a gay party. And so this went on for about a year. And I used to bring up a kind of a theme for each party, and we'd do a little show and so forth and so forth. And so after about 10 months of this, I was getting tired of doing all this. So different groups of guys would decide to do the show for that trip. So came the time we decided the kids from Dayton, we had a lot of kids from Dayton come over to these parties. They decided they would do the show. Well, of course, evidently the Dayton queens weren't all that friendly with each other. So the ones that organized it said, well, no, you can't be in it and you can't be in it. And so the ones that were thrown out of the party, they wrote a letter to the sheriff of Franklin County saying they were having these gay parties up at this place. So, well, it happens to be in Delaware County, so that the Columbus police sent it to Delaware, the Delaware sheriff. So this was the Memorial Weekend Party of 1956. And there was at least 250 queens there from all over Ohio. The place was packed, it only held 125. It was just packed. And of course, some of these queens were in drag. And about 10 o'clock or so, I don't know, maybe later that, I got a phone call. And there was the neighbors down the way, and they said, I don't know what's going on up there, but all these sheriff's things are down here and they're going to come up there. So whatever you're doing, straighten it up. So I went over to these queens and I said, oh, you'll have to get into your regular clothes because the police are going to be here now. But she says, I came in this. I came in this. So when the police came, the queens scattered. And of course, we always laughed and said, because it was out in the country in the cornfield there, we said that these queens tramped down 10 acres of corn. Going every which way. It was big, but it was just the harassment. There was nothing going on there. There was just music, dancing, and having a party, and that's what happened. And so what happened was they accused us of selling liquor. But everyone brought their bottle, and we put numbers on it, and you come up, and then we had bartenders help make drinks rather than have everybody do a drink. We had a bar, and you had a bottle, and we put a number on your bottle, and you get. And so then they accused us of selling liquor without a license, which is what we were not doing. So they cited me as the owner, and but of course, what they do is just disband all the queens. The queens have gotten their cards and they're posing for the photographers. And it was, but the thing was, the next thing, the thing comes out in the papers, and mainly in the Delaware papers. Because it was Memorial Weekend, the papers came out in the Delaware papers. But the most is strangest and the wildest thing just to let you know how things were in 1956. One of the main lines in the thing, when they described these 100 men, some of them were in the Bermuda type shorts. That's how restricted it was in 1956. So we've come a long way since 1956.
Absolutely.
So I was cited for that. So in order to get it out of the papers, I pleaded guilty and paid a $500 fine and got it out of the papers. And so then I disbanded the thing and went on with my life. But the thing was that shortly after that, my father died, and I went home and lived with my mother because all my brothers and sisters were married and had families. So I went home, but then I had to get a job. Well, what I had been doing, my sister, who had worked for the state, finally got me an interview with the superintendent of banks in the state of Ohio. And I went in and said, well, what have you been doing for a living? Well, I've been working in movies, and I've been in television, and I did some radio, and that was a great resume for getting a job. And so this guy who was superintendent, he was sympathetic to the arts because he used to play in a dance band. So he gave me, he said, oh, you can do this job. So he hired me as a bank examiner and handed me a manual, and I sat down and read it for a week, and then went to Cleveland to examine a bank. But fortunately, fortunately, you didn't do that. When you went in with a group of about 40. But the thing was, that's a funny story. They have a head examiner for the state and this head for the federal. And I went in, and then this head examiner said, Orn, what's your accounting background? I said, I don't have any accounting background. He said, well, what have you been doing? Oh, I've been working in movies. He says, well, you go back with the fellows in the vault and look at loan files.
See, you were an actor and an entertainer.
So I did that, and I went in there, and I did that for 25 years, and I retired as a bank examiner from the state of Ohio, and that's what I was. But that's what I heard that story later. The guys told me that's what he said. What in the hell is that guy trying to do to me? Now he's sending me actors. And that's the story of the Rathbone Ranch and how that situation. But if you want to go back to Hollywood, I'll do a little stint on Hollywood. I went to Hollywood in 1942. I went into the. I thought, after the war, you had this thing of going. You had to serve your country. So I went down and enlisted in the service, and I thought this queen who was down in the recruiting, she said, "I'll get you in the Air Force." Well, I went down there and I signed up. I ended up in the field artillery. And so I was out to do what to do. I was trying, and I was there for about 11 months. And I just did not fit in with the service. And I was getting a lot of problems. And so I think I was probably the first don't ask, don't tell person. And I was discharged, honorably discharged. They didn't understand homosexuality at that time. So they gave me a harmless discharge and severance pay, and I packed up and I went to Hollywood. That's where I belong. So I went to
But you
Hollywood.
still were a soldier in Hollywood, weren't you?
Oh, well, I went to Hollywood and I was in at least 100 movies as a soldier.
That's
So, no, everything. I was in Guadalcanal, I was in Bataan, I was in all those places.
You had the most extensive tour of duty of any soldier in that.
I remember being in a landing barge one time with Anthony Quinn.
Oh, wow.
And they were shooting these, we were supposed to be landing somebody, and they had these big 50-gallon drums of water, and they had these charges in it. And as the bombs hit or the shells hit, boom, they'd shoot this water all up over us. So, but every day was like a party. You go in the set, and it was wonderful because I was there during from 42 to 52, and I worked at every studio off and on, and probably I worked with every wonderful star. I worked with Elizabeth Taylor when she was 18. She's 80 now. And she was wonderful then. And but another thing was probably another thing I did during that time. I signed up at the Hollywood Canteen, and of course they had all the young starlets and things there down there to dance with the servicemen. But the guys, we go down, we bust the tables. And what they do, they let the place packed in to for an hour. Then they had and then they let more guys in. And so you had to clean up. So I did that. I did the Hollywood Canteen thing, and Betty Davis, was in charge of it. She was and a lot of famous old actors and things were working around and doing the odd jobs that has to be done in a nightclub like that. And it was great. And all the stars were up behind a bar, and they would sit there and sign autographs for the guys. That's what the big name stars were. So that was a wonderful episode at Hollywood. And the rest of the time, I did wonderful. I just had great time doing it. My most memorable movie, my best picture is Harvey Girls, and they show it on TV all the time. And I'm the only boy in a red shirt.
So everyone, when you're watching Turner Classic and you see it, watch the red shirt.
Red shirt, and then that was the Ashton Topeka number. And it lasts for 11 minutes on the screen. It's a Judy Garland movie. And we rehearsed it I was at MGM for 2 years under contract as a dancer. And this was my best, the most one I have the most film coverage in. And but the Ashton Topeka number is when they say here she comes, she says, and the line in the song is, "Hey Jim, you better get the rig. I'm Jim." And I'm in a red shirt on a horse now. So, but those was anything. But anyone wants to ask questions about Hollywood, I'll be glad to answer. If you want to talk about gay people in the business, at time I had worked with. I stood in for Van Johnson for a short time. I stood in for Robert Taylor on a couple of places, and those were two gays. And of course, I got to be very friendly with Bob Mitchum because I was on a picture with him for 6 months, and with he and Greg Garson, and he used to pick me up, drive me to work. He had an old beat-up car. At that time, he was a big star, but he wasn't making big money. He was furious because Greg Garson was making $200,000 on this picture, and he was getting $500 a week. And so he used to grab her when he did kiss her as hard as I could. But But she was a really lovely lady, and she was always very nice to me. But the funny thing was, after the picture, 6 months were on this picture, and it was a terrible picture, and it was never really released. It was terrible. It was called Her Kind of Man or something like that. And it was a terrible movie. But at the end of the picture, where she gave a cast party on the set, and she had a little band, and I was dancing with her, and I said to her, I'd love to have an autographed picture. She said, oh, of course. She said, I'll be glad to. She said, just put your name and address on see if I'll put my purse, and I'll have my secretary mail it to you. Well, of course, I was about 25, 26, and she was in her early 40s. And I never pictured Brie Garson as a pinup girl. But this picture arrived in the mail, and I opened it up, and here she is. She's laying out on a bare skin of a white bear rug with her hair all out in the bed. And down here, I thought, I just never thought of her like that. But it's a lovely picture, and I have it on my wall.
Yeah, that's great.
Or were you there during the McCarthy hearings starting up?
Yes, I was, and I was eligible to go to the actor's studio because of my GI Bill, but they had the actor's studio was right behind Schwab's drugstore, which was a very famous thing. But I thought I just never enrolled, and because something I just didn't do it. And that was actor studio in Hollywood there. That's where Larry Parks and all those people that were named the Unfriendly 10, they were all involved in that school. And I'm very happy to enroll in. But it ruined Larry Parks' career. It was really okay, but that's the only part I had involved in anything close to it. Any other questions?
Just a question, jumping ahead to Stonewall riots in New York City. Were all of you enclosed at the time, and was that impactful? Did you know at the time, the next day, that it happened, or is this something that sort of...
No, I didn't hear about that until later. I was in Columbus at that time.
I think that grew historically spread out. I mean, at the time, were you aware that it happened? Or I knew that it happened, but I didn't think.
Yeah, a little. I mean, it was one of those things that there were some small articles,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. It's become a much bigger thing than out here than it was at that point in time. I think people. One thing that I think people forget. Sometime, I don't know exactly what it was, but it was sometime in 64 or 65. We all grew up, not only, you were in the closet and all of that stuff, and it was hell growing up because you didn't know anybody else. I mean, in high school and stuff, you didn't know anybody else and you didn't know anything about gay people. I mean, the thing that we learned about gay people, many of you, of course, went through the same thing, was, looking up homosexuality in the encyclopedia, and that was about as racy as you could get.
Kinsey report.
The Kinsey report. The very first, I still remember, because I've known I was gay for as long as I can remember. There was never any doubt in my mind. I didn't exactly know what it was or anything, but I just, from the time I was 5 years old. But the very first time there was a cover story in Time magazine, and it was 64, 65, 66, somewhere along in there. And that was the first time that I had found anything other than academic stuff that talked about gay. Today, of course, gay stuff is all over the papers and magazines all the time.
I
Fred, was
remember.
the first time when you heard?
I was thinking, talk about the Kinsey report. Howard and I had just met, and he wanted to go to Mexico. So we went to New Orleans for the weekend. This was back when you took trains. and then we took the train to Mexico City. Now, we got on a train at New Orleans after our weekend there, and there'd been a wreck in Mississippi, so the train was delayed, so we read everything we had. We said to the porter, can we get off and come back? He said, yes, we came back, the train was gone. And so they stopped it at a place like Bexley, and they took everything off, everything but our books, which was the Kinsey report. I had to go into the airport, or the railroad station in Houston, and ask for my books. And I, oh God, I hate this, but I got it. But that was an embarrassing situation. I had, my reaction to gayness was, it's a miserable time as far as I was concerned, from the very beginning. I mean, not knowing I shouldn't be doing it, having everybody tell me I shouldn't be doing it, and then having all the incidents happen along the way, just made it not a thing that I enjoyed. And only, even with Howard, when Howard and I first met, we were arrested the first night, separated. And Howard had a brand new Olds convertible, and the police wanted that Olds convertible, or they were gonna arrest us, they were gonna turn us in. And we finally negotiated, they said, bring back a check bring back $500 in cash, we'll let you go. And I really, at one point there, I was seriously thinking, when I was in the car alone, let her go, Howard, I gotta make a dash, and I don't care if they kill me, because I just don't want this on my record. Well, he came back right then, so I couldn't do it, but we ended up giving the guy $100. You know, on Saturday night, back then, you didn't have ATM machines, you didn't have anything. So we finally went to him and said, we'll give you a check for $100, that's all we can do. So he gave Howard his keys back, and thank God he accepted blackmail, because that would have been, yeah.
How did you and Howard meet?
We met in a sleazy bar in Chicago. You know, the bars changed all the time because they kept closing them. And I had just broken up with a guy after about a year, and I was so tired. I moved that night, or that day, and I was in my room, and I thought, oh, I'm single again. I hadn't been single for quite a while. I've got to go to a gay bar. So I went to this gay bar with probably 12 people in the bar, and we're sitting I talked to the guy next to me, who was rather interesting, and all of a sudden, I looked in the corner of my eye and see Howard walk by. So pretty soon, he walked out the door alone. He'd come with somebody, he walked out alone. And I said, excuse me a moment. I went out, and Howard says, you believe? He says, you got a light. And if it wasn't enough, he said, where do you work? I was working for American Broadcasting. I said, I work for ABC. I said, where do you work? He said, MGM. He worked for the New York Central Railroad. So then after this incident that night, we exchanged phone numbers, and he went on his way, and he traveled from New York to Chicago on New York Central as safety director. So he was gone all week. Well, I called his home a couple of times, and finally he said when he got home, his dad said, there's a guy by the name of Fred Holdridge has been calling you. So he called me, and that started the whole affair. And then he got transferred, and I think he sort of, as I look back on his history, I think he figured, I'm transferred, this ends my relations in Chicago. So he came back one weekend and said, you know, we just can't keep on doing this. I said, that's okay, I'll move to Springfield.
Oh.
And so he was stuck with me.
So how long were you together then?
50 years. But I couldn't get a job in Springfield, and my friend in American Broadcasting, who had just taken a position in Hollywood as head of ABC TV, said, if you ever want a job, call me. So I called him, he says, come on out. And I got as far as Chicago on the plane, and I thought, no, I don't want to leave Hollywood. So I went back.
No.
That was it. That was the end of my Hollywood career.
Well, now, if you could just expand, you and Howard were also real pioneers here, having, what became, I know when I came here in the late 80s, everyone said, oh, there's a gay business in German Village, it's Hausfrau.
See, now we didn't think of it as that way.
We did. But I mean, it had been a legend, it was a legend well before that, but how did you get to the village? How did you
There was
really
a fellow by the
become
name
where
of
you
John Surratt lived in Columbus, and he was a friend of ours, and he was looking for a place to live. And we were, at that point, when we came back from New York, and he was there. We moved in with my aunt, who gave us the apartment on Central Park. And after 2 years, we said, you know, we don't like this, we're gonna move. And later on, when she passed away, we went into New York again. We're walking down the hall and I hear the stockbroker on the phone. He doesn't know I can hear it. He said, can you imagine those two queers thinking they can get into that building? Those other people in the that own the building would never let them in there. I went back to Howard, let's get out of here. But we came back to Columbus, we said, we're never gonna work for anybody else. So we bought some real estate, and then we had $7,000, and there was a car wash in Delaware for sale for $7,000. We did that for 3 years. But anyway, John wanted a place to live, because he had to move. And we were looking for a place, and he said, I'm moving to German Village. And what the hell is German Village? And he bought this house for $7,500 on 6th and Jackson. And he said, you gotta move down here. Well, we were very happy on Sunbury Road. So a commercial building was for sale that weekend. We bought it. We spent 3 years working, trying to figure out what to do with it. We had a laundromat. We ended up owning the laundromat. The grocer, there'd always been a grocer there for 100 and some years. We went in and told him we're gonna fix the walls, which were terrible. We're gonna tile the floors, which were just bare wood. We're gonna put a water heater in. He was cutting meat, but he had no water heater. And we're gonna charge you $50 more rent. Well, he backed off on it. So we spent 3 years trying to figure out what to do. And we said, we'll expand the laundromat. Neighbors said, no, you can't do that. They went to city council on it. And then one of them came over and said to Howard, well, what can we do with that building? Howard said, oh, be damned, but that woman's gonna tell me what I can do with my building. He said, it used to be a grocery store, we'll open this grocery store. So we started this grocery store with the idea that we would close it after a month and then try to find something to go in. Well, we never got it done. We never got it closed.
No.
So we got rid of the groceries.
And when was that? When did you open the grocery store?
In the early 60s, it had to be. And we had no idea what we were doing, absolutely no idea. I asked somebody, I said, what do you do when you own a store? He said, well, if somebody asks for something, you write it down. If 3 people ask, where'd you get it? Then we had artists who lived in the village.
Early inventory control.
We had artists who lived in the village, and they said, well, we'd like to have some place to show our work, so we did that. They were tearing down Town Street like crazy for the Market Mohawk, so we started buying pieces of that. And then somebody came in one day and said, I bought this card, why don't you guys carry this? And it was a little raunchy. And I said, well, I don't know, you have to carry it. He said, no, you don't have to carry it under the counter. I bought it on top of the counter. So we bought that, and then we started the cards. And that was a great thing. We had a great selection of cards. So then we found out we'd go to New York and pick up new stuff like Cuisinarts, Jelly Bellies, anything that was new, we'd grab it and do it. Sometimes it didn't go. Cuisinart was too expensive for people down in Germany. Well, I've got a lot of Cuisinart upstairs. But I don't cook, so the prices are still on them.
Dinner over at Fred's after.
But it just sort of grew. And we had a great time. Howard loved it. I mean, it was a social thing for him. And I must say, though, that the people who moved out of the grocery store told everybody we kicked them out. So the older residents didn't like us. It was new people who came in that we started building our reputation. It was a lot of fun. But you're talking about lesbians. One time when we were through New York Central, which was, oh my God, you wouldn't want to even think of anything in New York Central. And a friend of ours had a yacht down in Biloxi, and he said we could use it over 4th of July weekend. So we go down, and we have a captain and a first mate. The captain thinks these guys want women. 4th of July weekend, we're on the beach of Biloxi, and he's picking out all the women on the beach, and the first mate goes and asks, would you like to come out to that yacht? We had 100 women on that boat that day, and didn't do anything. So we thought, well, this is not going to be good, because he's going to tell the yacht owner who will get it back to the railroad. So we said, let's go to New Orleans. So Howard had a friend in New Orleans. He said, get all your lesbian friends and come out on Saturday night. So we had this big party with all the women, as the captain could see then. And then we felt a little better about the whole thing. But just had to work so many angles. You didn't go out, if you went to a restaurant, you didn't go out as a group of 4 or 6 guys. You'd stay home instead.
Would you ever go out, would you ever have women friends go
Yes.
along with you? So
That's true.
how did you have a certain, were they straight? Were they?
No.
No?
They were lesbians, and
Okay.
that's been over 50 years, and they're still friends. They're still alive.
Well,
They're still gay, they were the only 2 people that he knew, and
Uh-huh.
they met in college.
Wow.
They've been together for 60-some years,
That's amazing.
and they're very closeted.
What was your experience like in the clubs here?
You see, I was always married, so to speak, so you didn't go to clubs very much.
Okay.
Just, you know, my start temptation. We'd go occasionally
The
just for that.
270 wasn't built either, so.
But we go just for the hell of it, but once, and I guess it's that religious thing with me, that I always felt I should be, quote, married. I didn't feel comfortable being single. So I went immediately from one relationship into another. Turned out about 3 hours, that's it.
50 years is an awful long time.
Yeah.
Steve, do you remember going to Hausfrau Haven, or was
Oh,
it
sure.
a
Well,
gay?
I
Was
was
it
gonna say,
identified
no,
as a gay
look,
club?
these two, the stories that these two have got, you know, are so great. But it is interesting, German Village, all 3 of us, German Village was home. I mean, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
was,
But I
Warren
think-
lived on Fifth, and
That German, if it hadn't been for the gays, there were a lot of straights, but the
Oh, yeah.
gays were the ones.
Those are the gays are the ones that made German Village.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the first house I bought in German Village, I paid 10,600 for. It recently sold for 280,000.
Wow.
And that was one reason. And the other reason, I had a house that I built that I eventually sold for 243,000, I think. And but the thing was, it priced the Queens out of the village. The taxes got so high, and I had retired from the state. I couldn't afford the $2,000 taxes that on my house. So I ended up selling and moving to Tucson. But I wanted to get to another point of discrimination, which was very interesting. Somewhere around 1980 or something, I befriended a young man named Tom Gerard. And what happened was he had been discriminated by his family. But and eventually his mother threw him out of the house. He had been adopted, and the father died, and when the father died, the mother wasn't interested in children anyway. So he was actually thrown out of his house. And I took him under my wing, and we were friends for many, many years. I was sort of his dad. But in about 1980, he had been born with a heart deficiency. And when around 1980, he started having heart problems. And he was going to, he finally had heart failure,
Heart attack or?
well, no, when they die,
Oh.
when your heart stops. But anyway, so
No.
I took him to my my cardiologist because everyone in my family died of heart problems, and so I have been with a cardiologist. So I took him to my cardiologist, and while he was in the hospital for examination, he had heart. His heart stopped again.
Palpitation.
Well, he's gonna, but so my cardiologist says he's going to die. We can't do it unless he has a heart transplant. And I said, well, where do you get those these days? He says, well, they're doing them at Ohio State. He said, if you want me to, I'll write a letter and see if we can get him on the program up there. And so he did, and he got him on the program. And so few times later, not too long after that, he had another heart problem and was in the hospital. And so finally, he was in the hospital all the time because they had to have IVs in him to keep him alive. And so one Friday night, the phone rang about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I thought certainly they would tell me he had died. And he called and he said, no. He said, don't get excited, but they found me a heart. And it was just a terrible experience for me to have that. So I said, so I rushed to the hospital. And so during this time, the reason that I'm telling you this is because the head of the heart department that was doing the transplants said, why should we waste a heart on a homosexual? And so with a few important telephone calls to certain people, the university changed its mind. And he did get the heart. But the man who said that did not perform the operation. And he was it was very successful. He had the heart for 7.5 years. And the reason I'm in Arizona is because I went out there to be with him, and I sold everything. Of course, we had been rehabbing houses in the village. And then when we went out there, we were rehabbing houses in Tucson too. And so I sold everything, went there and bought a house, and he said, this will be a great retirement house for you. We'll fix it up. It was a fixer-upper. And of course, when he came home, he had this funny thing on his chest that looked like a bad pimple. And I said, what is that? He said, oh, don't worry about it. He says, they're going to take care of it when I get back. Well, we packed up all my stuff and we moved back, moved it out to Tucson. And what happened was it was a melanoma. And this was September. He died 2 days after Christmas. But the thing was discrimination against something like that. Was just made me feel terrible. But the fact is, he had 7.5 wonderful years. And but that was one discrimination.
Who were the first gay people that moved into the village? How did that happen?
John Surratt, I think. It was one of them.
They're just looking for an expensive property that they could work on and fix up, and just happened to be gays that did it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, there's an atmosphere, and I mean, you find this is not unusual in any city. And when I first came out in 1967, I met a young man by the name of Roberto Cambronero,
Yes.
who was an artist here in town. And there was a lot of the arts community that lived down there, and German Village in those days was sort of like what the Short North is maybe today.
Yeah.
A much younger population. It was inexpensive. Real estate could be bought very inexpensively, and it was close to downtown. You could get back and forth to the bars,
And the
smashed.
non-gays who bought were friendly.
We're very friendly.
Yeah.
I think I think German Village is one of the reasons that Columbus has been so successful in terms of our government, because for some reason, an awful lot of government people, city government people, lived in German Village. From Greg Lashutka to Cindy Lazarus to Janet Jackson and others, and so there were lots of contacts made, and also some pretty significant business people over the years.
And it wasn't just that they lived there, but that they had gay neighbors.
Exactly.
And they got to know gay folks. And so we weren't scary and we weren't so unknown. It was as far out as you wanted to go, but
But Fred and Howard became an institution in Columbus, and in that respect, did a great deal to enable other folks to do things.
I can still remember, it only had to be 15 or 20 years ago when a friend of ours who was straight, because we ran around with an awful lot of straight people, he said something gay to me. And I said, Pat, that's the first time any straight person has ever said anything gay to me. And I said, fine, glad, you don't have to worry about it. And incidentally, I never said anything to my family. I never could see that finding her gay and running home and telling mom and dad, because I figured they probably knew it anyway. But I received a letter from my brother, when that Methodist minister in Evanston came out and was appointed. My brother was very religious. He wrote the bishop a letter and said he was backing this guy, and then he put P.S. I'm familiar with this situation because I have a brother who is gay. And he sent me a copy of the letter, and because I didn't respond in 3 days, he thought I was upset, so he called me. And he said, you weren't upset by what I said, were you? I said, no, that was the nicest thing you ever said. So, they knew, but I don't know if my dad.
Speaking of institutions, I got married when I was 78, and my friend says, oh, you're such an inspiration to all of us. If you get married at 78, but, and he's great at it. He's in that red shirt over there.
Doug?
Steve is being far too humble about this. Talk about your own militancy and how you got into it. He's got a
You
story.
were militant. We thought maybe we ought to do away with you.
For what Fred didn't have a sandwich board on, then there was Steve.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know, it's, the very first thing, I was a school teacher. And teaching school in the 60s and 70s and being gay was a little different than it is today. And I'm still amazed at, today, and I love it when I see teachers who are just openly gay. It's really cool. But we live scared. I mean, there's no question. You always felt that your job was in danger, always. And so you had certain friends who perhaps were a little too flamboyant, or at least we thought were, and so we're not going out to dinner with them because we might be seen by the wrong people. And so yes, you took dates to school functions, and so you had friends that would fulfill that role. So, but I always was interested in politics, and I taught government, but that was just part of my interest. But the first thing that I think for many of us that really impacted us was the Anita Bryant thing.
I remember that very well. You were picketing Big Bear.
For God's sake, I've forgotten all about that.
Not only that.
We organized it in your kitchen, didn't we?
Yeah, not only that, I saw her on Lawrence Welk the other week or two ago. That one of those old programs. I thought, what are they bringing that quad back for?
I had forgotten all about that. The Anita Bryant thing was going on, and we were at Orn's.
Yeah.
This was the soup kitchen for many of us, because Orn is a fabulous cook and a fabulous host, so we had gone to our local Big Bear in German Village.
You know, because they had this display of oranges from
This is
Florida.
what year,
Right.
1970?
I don't know what the year it was, but I remember that display.
It's
Big
76.
Bear took down their display very quickly.
It was great because we felt power. They had this big poster, a full-size thing of Anita Bryant standing there with this big display
Of oranges.
and we came home and we thought, well, in our neighborhood, they're not going to do that. And so we got on the phone and we started calling every queen that we knew in German Village, and there were a lot of us. and we told them that we were going to demand that Big Bear get rid of Anita Bryant. And by God, within 2 days, Anita Bryant was gone. And we did. We felt power. By
Oh.
God, we actually achieved
No,
something.
you know what, we need to go back, hold on, Terry.
Quickly recap.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
What did Anita Bryant do?
Well, there,
Or share, I'm.
Dade County in Florida had passed a non-discrimination ordinance. And Anita Bryant was, actress, singer,
Former beauty
Former
queen.
Miss
former
America.
beauty
She was
queen,
like-
and she was,
She was like the June Weeper.
Yeah.
That sang and danced.
and
was
she
second
took
runner-up.
the lead. She took the lead in the movement to overturn that ordinance, and successfully so. But it was sort of the first time that there had been, that I remember, that
Right.
kind of a clash between the gay community and where people really stood up to something. And
And Hollywood stood up too, and she didn't, her career was finished
destroyed.
in Hollywood because of that attitude she showed.
And there was also a fundraiser here in town that was the first time I think any of us had ever written a check. Although we didn't write checks. Oh, no. And we raised a couple of $1,000s and sent it to Florida to fight the thing. So that was sort of the beginning of that. And then, I mean, there's no question that all kind of passed, but we had been inspired a bit, I think, and
Well, your
organized a
political
bit.
career has been quite successful. Are you going to fight Deborah Price?
Of course. But then, in the early 80s, of course, the whole AIDS thing really changed everything. And it changed it changed the relationship between the men and women in our community. I mean, it's changed. It's
Talk
a
about what it was
terrible,
like
terrible
before.
time.
Before and
I
after.
can't even talk about things. It was a wild life. We all.
No, I mean with men and women, like.
Oh,
what- I
they
mean-
just didn't mix. I mean, occasionally you might know somebody, but it was very seldom that you saw men and women mixing. It just, that really comes later. I mean, I'm sure there are some exceptions that, some of you out here may have had, but for the most part, the boys went to their bars, the girls went to their bars, and they had their own friends, and,
Steve, somebody over here has a question.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing what the impact of organizations like one incorporated in the Mattachine Society had on the community in Columbus. Did those kind of organizations have any impact on the community here?
Mattachine didn't have much, I don't think.
You remember Grant Mitchell?
Yeah?
He used to get that Mattachine magazine, and never had any influence on me. I never really bothered with it, but I guess it did some people. But
I don't know of any. Doug, you?
There were a lot of women's lesbian groups that were organized in the early 70s.
I think, yes, and I think that probably the women's community was probably much more active, militant, and organized long before the men's community. We were party. We were, and it was, it was a good party. I mean, the guys just had a good time. We went to Provincetown, we went to Key West. Not that this has totally changed, but it was a different time.
Were there bathhouses here?
Oh, yeah, of course. And everywhere. I mean, every town had its bathhouses, and not everybody was involved with them, but there was lots of stuff going on, and it was a carefree time. I will, for young people, it's hard to imagine. I mean, to not have AIDS hanging over your head was a very different time. I mean,
It was.
what the big risk for us was that you get the clap, you go to the doctor and get a shot. It was as simple as that. And that was the biggest
you're
concern
saying
we had.
when I went to Chicago, when I got out of college, I got a job, and one morning I get up and I take a leak, and oh my God. Oh, I don't know who to go to, I don't know what to do, so I called a friend and I said, do you have a gay doctor? And he says, yeah. So he gave me his name, and I went to see him. He says, Fred, I'm an optometrist.
Oh, we have, there's a wonderful, we have a query in the audience.
I have a question. Looking at you guys, sometimes I think that I kind of came out later. Maybe I've done enough with my life. What do you guys think about people that are still closeted? Or do you think that, do you still respect that or understand that? Or do you feel that you guys have done so much that people should get a little further along? Or where are you guys at with that?
I feel sorry for him.
Well, there's still lots of people that are closeted,
Yeah.
and some people just cannot cope with it. And I've had several friends who committed suicide because they could not cope with it. And years ago, there was one friend said to me, he says, "Oh, I so admire you because being gay doesn't seem to bother you at all." And being gay has never bothered me. I've felt very free all my life. And but there's a lot of people that just can't deal with it. Can't deal with it, and there are still lots of closeted people.
But I respect him. I mean,
I respect everyone. Whatever you're thinking, as long as you can be yourself and do what you want with your life, I respect anybody with it. It's when people try to tell you what you should do with your life, it's the problem.
But I worry because we have known what it was like when we had problems. And I think we had an HRC dinner where that fellow spoke who was a scriptwriter for Jerry Falwell.
Yeah, White.
And he said, watch out, they're waiting for you. They're gonna get you. They're building. You've gotta watch out. You gotta get your defenses ready. I think we're reaching a point like that.
Oh, we certainly are.
And we can't just say, well, it's all roses, because it isn't. We gotta watch.
We live in kind of a island here in the middle of, I don't know, what's the rest of the state, you know? But you know, I think everybody, obviously, it's a lot easier to come out today than it used to. But I think everybody kind of has to go at their own pace. And so, you know, I think it's good to encourage people. I think usually people's fears, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, people's fears are greater than the realities. I mean, I certainly know that that's been true in my life, and most people I know, when they have come out, have had less difficulty than they thought they were going to have. But there are people in a position that they just can't. They just can't. And I think we have to respect that.
We had a customer come in our store. They were friends of Howard, my partner's mother, and they're very religious. And my Howard said, that guy's gay. But we didn't think anything about it. One Sunday night he called, said, can I come down? We said, yes. So he came down and he says, I'm gay. Howard looked at him. So he said, my wife and I, she's just furious, and I can't live in the same house with her. We said, well, we're going to New York tomorrow. If you want to stay here, that's fine. We'll talk about it when we come back. Well, when we came back, number one, he locked himself up on the roof at one point and had to break the window to get out. Number two, we never saw him again. I had to call to get the key to the apartment. I don't know what happened. To this day, I think that he was forced to go. I think he went back to his wife. Either that or I don't know what happened, but he was so sad that night to end it all, and then gave up. It's a hard battle because his family and his wife's family were friends, and they were very religious, and he just reached a point where he couldn't take it. But I think he went back and became a closeted case. The hellish life.
Karen?
I have two very different questions. One is, how did y'all find each other? back in the 40s through the 80s, or even I guess more like the 40s through the 70s. How did you find each other? And then the other question is kind of geared towards Steve. Could you give us a little bit more about the political organizing after Anita Bryant and the building of that?
So first, the Carnation and Motel question.
Gaydar.
That's true, it's true. I remember the first indication I had of how they told me was when you look at somebody when you're walking down the street, if they keep holding your eyes and walk by you, and then you turn around and look, and they're turning around looking at you.
Some things haven't changed at all.
That was my first lead. I didn't know where I was.
Well, if you're standing on a street corner and somebody pulls up and says, "Want a ride?"
Do you have a light? And the bars, and there was I mean, at least when I came out in the late 60s, there were several bars, and it was interesting. None of them were like today. I mean, they were all kind of hidden away and no signs.
And sometimes there were bars in regular restaurants, but you knew that the word was out, that's a gay bar, like the Sherman Hotel in New York, or in Chicago, bar there was notoriously gay.
Even in Columbus, in the 70s, there was that club out on the east side, Frankie's, that had the strobe light, and you had to go. They had to know you to let you in, and if you were on the dance floor, it was illegal for two men or two women to dance together. And so, if the police were there, they turned the strobe light on, which said, "Get off the dance floor." I mean, so that was still going on.
How did they get to know you? But whether it's looking through the trap door,
It was
or
a small
like,
community, actually.
Okay.
It really was a pretty small
Yeah.
community.
It takes one to know one.
I have another question. You guys seem to have gone through so much in years past with just being out and being gay. Did that make any of you guys bitter? We have it so much easier now today to be out and gay or open or whatever. Are you guys bitter that you had to go through so much injustice and craziness just to be who you were? Or are you?
Well, as Betty Davis said, "Pita, pita, don't be bitter." But if there's one thing I can't stand, it's bitter pita.
Steve?
Following that. I don't think I mean, it's great that things have changed, but there are certain things like that are tougher today, I think.
Right, we didn't have AIDS.
Yeah, so I mean, there are different aspects to all of it. You were talking about the political organization. Well, Stonewall sort of started, and it was looked at by many people in the community as being a terribly radical organization. One of the things, political activism, does force people out. And so there were lots of people, and here are two pretty good exceptions to this, but I would say that there were a good number of people in their generation who really fought the activism that came because it was a threat to their closet.
Sure.
And so when we began to do stuff, they got very nervous, and there are many people that I had as close friends that were not close friends after I became involved as I did, because they just did not see us as having the same things in common. The real organizing really, again, I think really started for many of us. We had our lead. There were people out there, as I say, that were sticking their necks out and were fighting the system and fighting the situation. But AIDS forced us to organize.
Yeah.
We had to organize because no one was taking care of our folks. And they didn't care. There was there are exceptions to that, but there were a lot of people out there. And they thought it was great. All these gay people dying. Hey, that's great. Let's get rid of them.
And Steve, literally, I mean, for folks, that, you know, for younger folks here, I mean, they were not admitting people in hospitals or nursing homes. I mean, people could not get medical care.
They couldn't get buried.
Yeah, they couldn't get handled by emergency medical personnel. They could, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them from dying. Nothing.
So
I think that was the thing that solidified us.
yeah, I mean, I think in lots of ways, it really gave us focus and it was of necessity. And so many of the early organizations where the organizing came was around AIDS organizations, but then it also sprouted other interests because we suddenly realized that there were certain things that government needed to do, and they needed to respond, and we were very blessed here. We had a health department that was very quickly involved. Well, she's now the
Was
director.
Dr. Long here then?
Dr. Long had just come. She was an assistant to Mr. Myers, and she had come from San Francisco. And because of her experience in San Francisco, and because Dr. Myers was a very compassionate man, we had a health department that was involved very early on. And I think we were maybe one of the first 2 or 3 cities in the United States where we actually got money from city council to help fund some of the early AIDS efforts and to help the CATF organization.
Was it Senate 1? Was it Hobson's?
Yeah, then of course, oh gosh, there were so many, there was so much going on. You had, because you had so many different levels. The state of Ohio, under Dave Hobson, passed a piece of legislation that dealt with discrimination and how the state was going to deal with AIDS, and it was really a model for the country. It was one of the most open-minded, progressive pieces of legislation.
Who was the governor then?
Celeste.
Probably.
Celeste.
It had to.
Yeah.
It's the Ohio we remember and really like. We're going to work to get it back.
Really. So, but that was that was a lot of it. And Stonewall was here, and Stonewall began doing the Pride March, and then in '83 we started the Human Rights Campaign, did our first fundraiser for that.
Yeah. Well, remember at the Berwick, the first year we auctioned off the 9 tables that are around the stage, and that was amazing. We raised $12,000 for those 9 tables.
And what did it go for?
It went to the Columbus AIDS Task Force.
Do you remember
When was the first Pride Parade?
That was I was just going to ask.
The first
when do you remember attending Pride, or did you ever attend Pride? I know you did, Steve. Did you attend Pride marches, and when was the first one that you remember?
No, the first one that a few years ago, that my name was on the side of one of the cars in the parade, but I wasn't in Tucson.
So you're there in spirit.
Yeah. No, I was never very politically involved.
Howard and I were 1 year, but we didn't go. Later on, I was, and I went. That's the first Pride parade I'd really seen from inside out. That was a big eye opener, because I was always, House and Garden Tour was always the same time, and I was always wrapped up into
The
that.
German Village House and Garden Tour is always that same weekend.
And I was
Very
working on that.
But then we know Steve's been to a couple of them.
1 or 2.
I'd like to say something. One, you were talking about meeting places. I remember, some of you may remember this and have a laugh about it, but Oakland Avenue, which is 3 blocks north of Lane Avenue, I lived there for 13 years between 80 and 93. Yeah. It used to be, I would say, why can't I turn right after 10 o'clock or midnight, whatever? And I always broke the rule, and I always turned right, waiting for a policeman to stop me, because it was such a stupid rule. But that was the wall, yeah. So one of the meeting places that was popular at the time. I came to Columbus after being the director of a human sexuality center in Boston from 73 to 75. And they hired me at the mental health clinic here in 75. And the moment I arrived here, I'm speaking about the university being a center, there was a group called the GAA, and some of you...
Gay Activist Alliance.
Yes, the Gay Activist Alliance on OSU campus, which was really the precursor of the Stonewall, certainly. And they would have the Gay Awareness Week, and they would have meetings, and some of you attended them, and I would be asked to talk there quite a bit. I actually brought just something that was in the paper with me, which was kind of amusing. I have it in my office just because I used to have this wild Afro hairstyle at the time. So when I work with my transgender clients, it's kind of funny. I stuffed it in here because I wasn't feeling it. So here I am talking about coming out in 1979. But the Gay Activist Alliance...
You should never hand it to the guys.
That's my...
I can tell you, I don't know what year it was here in Columbus, but I took part in the very first Lesbian Gay Pride Day celebration in Hartford, Connecticut. It was 1983. That wasn't that long ago. You know what I'm saying?
And GAA then actually...
No, the first one in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
Kelly, do you know when the first Pride was in Columbus?
82.
82.
We'll talk about that next.
Okay, okay.
And then in the early 80s, actually, this was, it was 75, right away, like November, I think it was, the Franklin County Mental Health Association had a big luncheon, and they asked me to talk about homosexuality. And right after that, it was the Mary Haven Alcoholism Center wanted an in-service for their staff, and Harding Hospital had a 5-week series on homosexuality. It was just like the city was hungry for this, and I felt like there were days that I would be going to 2 or 3 different presentations. It was pretty crazy. And then in 1980, there was a radio program WBNS had, which they had me on, which was called Let's Talk It Over. Do some of you remember that? I used to be stopped at banks and saying, oh, I know that voice. And it was just, but anyway, they knocked me out because I was too much pro-choice. I made a series and I told everybody to call in. I got caught. So it lasted a year, which was good. And then in I think it was 83 or 4, some of you will remember, there was this incredible, disgusting, supposedly minister came from, I want to say Arizona, but out west. And he was saying, mosquitoes bite gay people, and WTVN had me on to fight with him. I have that tape, I'd love to find it. I think it was taped. And with a lot of, in any case, it's kind of,
Well, it was
so Ohio
pretty
State and
wild
the
there.
GAA was really fantastic. And in the early 80s, then the medical school, because I used to do teaching to the whole, 350 medical students on human sexuality in general, and I would have a section on definitely homosexuality and transgender people. And they would go and complain to the dean. Oh, she's shoving homosexuality down our throat, and she shouldn't be talking. In any case, that happened many a time until there were enough gay students who rose, and they had a dinner. And at this dinner, they asked me to lecture as the first kind of opening educational part, and then one by one, they came out to their friends, to their classmates, which was really a moving thing. I don't know if there's anybody who was in medical school in those years here, but now there's an incredibly active medical school gay lesbian group. They just are doing fantastic work, and everybody's out and everybody's comfortable. So there's a lot of improvement.
Oh, yeah, I don't exactly know what the dates were, Doug, but there was a purge at Ohio State.
I don't know about that.
In the late 80s, is that what you're talking about?
No, it was before that. This would have been in the
60s.
In the 60s, I think, because there was lots of fear among the faculty at Ohio State in those days. And I can remember I was at just about the time that I was graduating, and I was at a party in Bexley, a gay party. And one of my professors walked in the door and saw me, and I thought he was going to have a heart attack right on the spot, because there had been a number of folks from Ohio State that had been let go and so forth. So, it hasn't always been a great atmosphere even there.
Steve, tell us about fraternity life back in the 60s. To see if it's any different than it was in my day.
Well, I was a professional pledge. I never went active, but I did live in the house a couple of quarters and so forth. You just live in fear. You did everything possible, at least I did everything possible to not be exposed.
I was 3 years, and never any sign of anything.
Yeah. It just, I dated and almost got married and went through all of the stuff that you were supposed to do. Then I met Roberta.
Question. When you say 2 men would be arrested for kissing or dancing, did these ever show up in the newspapers like the police beat? And what were the penalties, like the fines or jail time? And did anyone ever fight it in court?
No, there wasn't any point in fighting in court. So, but normally what people did is they plea bargained out of it as much as possible. It was harassment, as Orn said. It was
harassment.
Or you paid, it sounds
small
like,
fine.
sometimes you paid some cash and.
But I mean, Norm.
Yes, it was a friend of ours at the, what was that?
Tradewind.
Tradewind. Yeah, Richard's Tradewind. Kissed the guy as they were going out the door, saying goodbye. The police were there, grabbed him, threw him in jail. It cost him a lot of money for it before he got out. And it was. I remember these 2 friends of ours who were the era period when caftans were in. And they got pretty drunk at the trade winds, and the 2 of them were out in the street, and somehow the paddy wagon was out there, and this one was pretty drunk, so they just ushered him right into the truck, and they're taking him to the jail, and the one says, what do you do for a living? He says, I am an interior decorator. And the cop says, I bet you are.
I was wondering if the Stonewall riots helped in the smaller resisting. Like, if knowledge of what happened there maybe helped resist the smaller harassments that people were sort of bargaining out of or not willing to challenge. Do you think that it had an impact individually or community-wise to say, I'm not going to do this anymore? Like, I'm going to fight that, or I'm going to take that to court, or I'm not going to pay that bribe, or I'm not going to, like, was there any translation?
That's what Stonewall was all about, wasn't it?
Sure, yeah, I mean, that was, it was the first time people stood up, that, to any of our, it wasn't like the next day there were headlines in the paper. Right. So it was one of those things that kind of filtered out, and people learned about it. There were some small articles and stuff in the beginning, and I think over history it's become a bigger thing because it's an enormously important symbolic.
Did it give you courage to like with Anita Bryant? Did it inform you at all? Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it was something that I think it's probably become a much more important thing in the last 15 years.
I would just point out though, I wouldn't have much context till the 70s, but how you got news was much different. If you can imagine your television set having 3 channels, not having an internet. There's no CNN, there's no NPR, there isn't, you get like the headlines and you have the local newspaper, but how did you there was no Advocate, there was no Outlook.
There were some little gay papers around. Stonewall had a little paper that they put out.
When would that,
but there was some stuff later on, there was some stuff in it, but no, there wasn't a whole lot of news and it wasn't covered. One of the early things early in the AIDS mess, would have been 83, 84. It was very early on. In fact, there was, I think at that point, John Anderson was maybe the first person who had died in Columbus that we knew of. And he was a friend of all of ours. And there were a couple of guys that had a little TV station, or a TV program here. And a group of us would get together, and it was like, we've got to do something. We've got to inform our friends. And it was many of us who were out traveling a lot. I mean, People Express came into Columbus, and for $30 you could fly to New York. And so every Friday night you would go to the airport, and it looked like a gay bar lined up to get on the airplane and go to New York. So, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons that in the early days the incidence of AIDS in Columbus, Ohio was much higher than it was in other Ohio cities, and I think it was directly because of People Express.
So,
but anyway, we were a little aware of this, and we began to hear things coming out from friends that we knew in New York and stuff. So we had this one case diagnosed here in Columbus by a Dr. Bechtel, who was a dermatologist, and he diagnosed it because, of course, of the KS, the Kaposi's, the unusual skin cancer. And that was why it was a dermatologist. But we didn't even call it AIDS then. It was another SIDS or something. And so we decided to use this little Channel 3 show that these Val
Dogmartin.
And I forget the other guy's name. So we got together with them, and we thought we're going to do this on their show. We're going to put together a film, and we're going to talk about this. So we of course, it cost a little money, so we got on the phone. Imagine, I started phoning my friends and asking them for money. And
Steve could run
some things don't change very much. And I'm sure that there are probably at least 6 or 8 people in this room that got phone calls from me that evening. Anyway, we raised, I don't know how much money, but and everybody had their little thing. Well, we wanted to buy advertisements in the Dispatch to get people to watch the show. And several of the guys went down and had to have a meeting with the Dispatch editorial board to see if they would let us run the ads. And they did. They convinced them to do it, and we ran the ads. And then we went around and we made posters, and I've still got some of this stuff at home. I need to get it to the archives. And they made this tape. We went around to all the bars. We were thrown out of one of the bars because gay people don't want to hear about that stuff. A bar is to have fun. Happily, that bar was gone within a year because that word got out. And the tape, almost all the information that we presented was absolutely wrong. It was that early. But it was an awareness thing. But the stuff that we went through to try and get that word out, but all of this was part of organizing, Every little thing that we did led to something else. It networked, it increased the number of people that I could call and get money from.
I heard when I first came to Columbus, it was 76, and I would talk to people who'd been around. They used to talk about rent busting parties, that the bars would empty out and it would be your turn to have all the people over your house, which would cause you to lose your lease. Is this true?
I never heard anything.
Never heard that.
Maybe someone's pulling my leg.
I don't know about that, but I remember there was a house on Hudson Place. There was a decorator of clothes, sold fabrics, and a window dresser lived there.
Oh, yes.
And they had, the house looked like hell on the outside, but inside it was magnificent. And they used to have big parties, and then the Air Force Base finally put their house off limits to the
Orn, do you remember that house too?
Oh, yes, I was there many times.
Well, before I know we could probably talk for hours and hours, and I thought maybe we could have like a parting thought from everyone. You know, if either, you know, share a story or a lesson learned that you'd like to share with folks, and also just, I have to say, I mean, it is amazing to hear stories, and again, I have to thank Rob and Rob's efforts, and thank Stonewall for doing this, but we have to do more of this. It's fantastic.
A little funny story I thought might interest people. We had a friend here named Harold Call. It was that when I was in Hollywood, he came out to Hollywood at that time too, and he got a job at Disney. And he had graduated from the art department at the University of Arizona. And he got a job at Disney doing the little cartoons and things. And but on Saturday night in Hollywood at that time in the 40s, well, you dressed up as your best thing, a bit Tucker, you know, and then we'd go to Ciro's, and which was the most elegant nightclub in Hollywood, and all the stars went there, and you see all the stars there. But the drinks at the bar were $3.50, which was a lot of money in those days. So you saved up your money for Saturday night at Ciro's, and Harold and I were there, and this old movie star, which he was a silent movie star, he was a big silent movie star, his name was William Haynes. I remember he invited us over to his table, and of course I was about 25, and he was well into his high 40s. And
Old man.
An old man. But you know we're sitting there while Ronald Reagan comes by and he's going to the John. He's going to the John, and Harold and I are sitting there. Harold said, he jumps up and he follows Ronald Reagan into the John. and he comes back and he says, you know what? He's not circumcised. That's my funniest story about Ronald Reagan.
You all now know something about Ronald Reagan that I'll bet very few people.
Maybe Nancy.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, tell us your funny one. You got lots of funny ones.
Oh, no.
My only thought is we have to be on the defensive. We can never stop the fact that somebody wants us out of here, and we have to maintain our fight to keep our position, because we can't rest on our laurels.
Right.
Definitely not.
And I think the other thing is that voting and all of that. I mean, I don't think we need to tell anybody in this room that we've all got to be pretty active. But also, you just don't give up on people. I have a great story about my father. Some of you met. He was at the HRC dinner a couple of years ago. And he was just an old, he died last year, he was 97. And he was a right-wing Republican. Oh God, we had battles. And, but I'll never forget, my parents always knew that I was gay. I came out to my parents officially when my partner of 17 years was diagnosed with HIV back in about 81, 7, 88, somewhere along there.
I thought it was earlier than that.
And they, were pretty good, but it's always been a little tough. And so we'd have lots of discussions and we'd talk about it. And, I always thought he was kind of hopeless. He loved me and we had a good relationship, but I always thought, he's never really going to deal with this very well. And he was on every right-wing mailing list that there was. And back a few years ago, we were the target. Right now it's Hillary Clinton. They raise all their money on Hillary Clinton, but we were the ones that they raised their money. And Jerry Falwell would send out these letters asking for money because, of course, the queers were taking over the world. So I was home one day and he said, well, you're going to be proud of me. I said, I am. Why? He said, well, I got this letter from Jerry Falwell and he was raising money on you guys again. And he said, so I took the envelope and the card and I wrote across it, my son is a fag, take me off your list. So, you just don't ever give up.
Well, I have to thank all of you for participating and for being here. And Orn, are you going to be here for Pride? Will you be able to stay in town?
Oh yeah, I'm going to be here, but I come back because in '78 I was chairman of the German Village tour, and I'd like to come back and see my old friends. But my old friends consist of these two.
Well, it's the 25th anniversary of Pride, and
Yes, I know.
you could all run circles around 25, but we're all pleased that it's there and that you all help lay a foundation, whether you want to admit it or not. You help lay the foundation to get everybody here and to get all these folks in this room and have this center open. I mean, you know, if you guys hadn't stood up before, you stood up in the ways that you did, others wouldn't have gone forward and so on and so forth. So I have to thank you, and I think everybody here would thank you too. So.